Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jenny Lawson, President and CEO of Keep America Beautiful. We are so delighted to have you join us today for this webinar, the first in our Community Action webinar series, talking about litter and its effects on creatures, big and small. I love that PBS series, All Creatures Great and Small, and the powerful images of how people and nature work together to make this amazing world that we call home. Except when it doesn't work. And the issues of litter are central to the work of Keep America Beautiful. For 70 years now, we have led the national dialogue about litter in communities, about the power of solutions for litter abatement, for recycling, for beautifying communities in such a way that everyone can enjoy them, regardless of their background or economic status. So I'm delighted to bring you this series along with this terrific set of panelists that we have today to start to explore what that means and what that means for each of us in our daily lives and how we might think about the issues of litter in new ways. Because litter's not always visual. It also has physical impacts for us and for nature. And we'll hear from this amazing panel of experts, including members of the Keep America Beautiful affiliate network, which represents more than 700 affiliates across the country. Those affiliates have some affiliates of their own. So it's a network of nearly 2,500 national organizations. And we're delighted to have some of those representatives with us here today, as well as other colleagues who are really national leaders in litter and ocean plastics. And so thank you for being a part of this. Your moderator today, and I'm delighted to introduce, is David Wheeler. David Wheeler is my colleague here at Keep America Beautiful. He is the director of our Grants and Foundations program, and he has been the past executive director of New Jersey-based wildlife conservation organization. He's taught environmental communications at Rutgers, and he's the author of the book, and I'm going to look at my paper just so I get this right, Wild New Jersey, Who Knew? Native Adventures in the Garden State. So I am delighted to turn the mic over to David Wheeler. David, thanks for joining us.
Great. Thank you so much, Jenny. Really want to welcome everybody. And, just one of the great things about this topic is, for me personally, wildlife and the ocean have always been two passions, both personally and professionally. And that wildlife interdependence for humans that Jenny mentioned, it's really extraordinary when you think about it. I would venture to say that many of us on the call right now value wildlife inherently for its own sake. But that's not the case for everyone. And it's always helpful to realize that isn't the case, that for those folks, we need to speak about wildlife and that interdependence in a very different way. And even those folks would care quite a bit. They might not care about an Atlantic silverside or a Pacific sea cucumber, but we can certainly get their attention when we talk about the hundreds of millions of dollars that a fishing industry may generate for a region, or conversely, the negative impacts to a coastal economy from pollution and red tides, jellyfish swarms, litter. And so that adage comes to mind, as we talk about this, that every river reaches the sea. And unfortunately, in today's world, we have a counterpart to that adage, is that every piece of litter, ultimately, if we don't take action, every piece of litter will do the same and end up in the ocean, as we're seeing in the Pacific and across the world. So let's learn about what this means. Let's hear from these speakers and also learn what we can do about those problems. With that, I'm going to introduce our speakers, and they are Heather Hogan of Ocean Plastics Leadership Network, Pat DePlasco of Keep Pinellas Beautiful, and Gabby Polo of Keep America Beautiful. We'll begin with Heather. Heather is the executive director of the Ocean Plastics Leadership Network and is passionate about community-based solutions and empowering marginalized communities. In her work for OPLN, Heather helps bring together stakeholders across industry, activism, and government to address the global issue of plastic pollution in our oceans. An environmental scientist and urban planner specializing in resource efficiency and sustainable development, Heather has worked in the waste management sector for 15 years, designing national solid waste management strategies in the US, Africa, Asia, and Europe. Heather, can you tell us about your network's approach to fighting the problem of plastics in the ocean?
Yeah, thanks so much. And thanks everyone for joining this conversation today. At the Ocean Plastic Leadership Network, we really believe that everybody comes to the table, all sides. And you mentioned it already. We've got economic interest, we've got big industry, we have kind of communities on the other end who are dealing with the brunt with pollution. We have, activists and environmental groups, which I think are largely represented here, who are really passionate about their local environment and community. We have governments that are responsible to manage, policies and budgets to prevent litter and waste from being mismanaged. And then we've got the waste management industry, the plastics production industry, those companies making all the products we use. So, our work focuses very acutely on plastics pollution in the ocean environment. And we see all of these forces coming to play that have an interest, that have a perspective, and most importantly, have capacity to drive solutions. But no one's going to solve the problem alone. We think that there's 8 to 12 million tons of plastic going into the ocean every year. That's the equivalent of an entire dump truck of plastic waste being dumped into the ocean every second of every day, all year long. So it's a really big problem, and none of us are going to solve it alone. And we really believe at the Ocean Plastic Leadership Network that we all have to come together and have really hard conversations where people disagree and they argue, but we really get to the point of where are we misaligned? Where are there places that we can't make progress? And really importantly, where are areas that we do agree? And what we find in our conversations with our over 400 members is that there's normally many more areas of alignment than disalignment. And so we help our partners see that, and then to work on those areas where progress is immediately possible.
Thank you, Heather. And you certainly raise a number of issues we're going to be covering later in the webinar, and that image of the dump truck every second into the ocean is frightening, to put it mildly. But first, I'd like to introduce Pat DePlasco. As the executive director of Keep Pinellas Beautiful, Pat has spent over 25 years in community service leadership roles and is passionate about empowering residents of Pinellas County, Florida, to increasing individual responsibility and environmental stewardship of their community. She recently helped spearhead the creation of a KPB microplastics program to engage and educate community members about the effect of plastics and microplastics on ecosystem health, the harm they cause to marine life, and how they can take action to help stop the plastic pollution problem. Pat, how would you frame the challenges of ocean microplastics?
I try not to think of the problem of ocean plastics because it's so overwhelming, So what I try to do is concentrate on what we can do to decrease the amount of plastics that are in our waterways. One of the neat things about our programming is that number one, we use the Keep America Beautiful curriculum, not only to educate students, but we also educate adults about the problems. And when we also like to offer them solutions. Every program that we have, by the way, Keep Pinellas Beautiful, just to give you a little information, Keep Pinellas Beautiful is in Pinellas County, Florida, which is a peninsula in Tampa Bay, attached to Tampa Bay. So we're surrounded on 3 sides with water. So our whole economy revolves around beautiful waterways. So that's a given when you come in and you go to take over Keep America Beautiful affiliate here. It's like, okay, well, we know that litter starts on land, and 80% of it ends up on our waterways. So what do we have to do? We have to educate the people on land to keep the pollution out of the waterways. And what we've done as far as creating the microplastics program is we took all of the Keep America Beautiful concepts and talked about litter, talked about why people litter and the different types of litter, and then also brought it all the way down to microplastics. And then we have a citizen scientist program. Now, the way that we work all of our programs, our community improvement initiatives, our beautification projects, our education thing, everything is revolved around education. So that is the foundation of what we do. So you go out to a cleanup with us and it's an experiential learning situation. We train our site captains, we train obviously our staff is trained, in what they need to talk to the people about. Now, the reason why we do that is because this problem is so big. Getting back to your question is to, how are we dealing with this problem? Well, we have to create a culture of environmentally responsible people. And how do we do that? How do you do that? Well, we educate, we engage, and we empower. We teach the people about the problem. We engage them in particular activities, particular solutions to the problem, and then we teach them how to do it on their own. So, I know that you could relate to these questions going further down, but how do you create the stewards in our community? Is you concentrate on those areas and you get the people involved and you do it in a positive way. And you want people to always come back. So by teaching people with respect and dignity, we want for them to develop the pride that we have in America, and especially the pride they have in their home.
Thank you, Pat. I love the focus on education and especially about framing the problem, not as the sky is falling, but
Right.
that people can take action through citizen science and so many other ways.
That's right.
And we'll be revisiting that as well
Mhm.
in this talk. I next want to introduce Gabby Polo, who's also the newest staffer at Keep America Beautiful. Gabby is deeply passionate about supporting community-led solutions and has contributed to achieving critical milestones in revitalizing coastal habitats, protecting biodiversity, and securing coastal livelihoods along the Central American coastline and California's Bay Area. With experience in program implementation and behavior change campaigns at her previous positions at Coastal Quest and RARE, Gabby has supported diverse partners in advancing solutions for coastal communities and the ocean. Gabby, how would you summarize the problem of marine debris in your own experience?
Well, thank you, David, for that introduction. So marine debris is a serious issue that impacts our environment, our health, our economies. And then just to put a little bit of context, marine litter is anything that's man-made, right? So think of your plastic bags, your bottle, as Pat was saying, anything that kind of begins on land, but it also includes things like fishing gear that's discarded or abandoned in the sea. So I did want to provide that little bit of context there. So the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, estimates that there's somewhere between 20 million and 1.8 billion pieces of plastics along our coastlines in the United States. And then in 2020, KB's National Litter Study found even higher numbers of litter, with over 25.9 billion pieces of litter along the shores of the waterways in the United States. So definitely litter in our marine environments is a big issue. And as this webinar series title hints at, litter really hurts all creatures, big and small, and that can be from turtles and whales to seabirds, seahorses, crabs, and even humans. According to the United Nations, at least 800 species worldwide are affected by marine debris. And in my work with fishing communities in Central America, I've really seen how marine litter can lead to loss of biodiversity and loss of ecosystem function and services, and how it can really hurt marine life. So litter, for instance, can be mistaken for food by marine creatures, or it can lead to entanglement, which can harm them or even kill them. Discarded, lost, or abandoned fishing gear, for example, can continue to trap fish and animals, entangling them, and also smothering habitat and polluting habitat, and maybe you don't think about this, but also acts as a hazard to navigation. So that's kind of a big impact to wildlife. There's also the big impact that marine litter has on our economics, right? So it can lead to serious economic losses. And the United Nations Environment Program actually estimates that plastic waste in particular cause the marine environment up to $14 billion. And that figure seems kind of an underestimate when you add up the cost across the different sectors. So coastal communities nowadays are facing increased expenditures and having to clean up their beaches, on public health, on waste disposal. The tourism sector, for instance, has to deal with the loss of income and bad publicity. There's the shipping industry, right, that's impacted by higher costs associated with like damaged propellers or damaged engines when they come up across garbage patches or obstacles as they navigate the waters. They have to remove litter and manage that in harbors. And there's, of course, the fishing industry that faces reduced and lost catch, damaged nets, and other issues, right, that also affect their livelihoods and their economics. And there's also the impact that litter and pollution on our oceans have on fish farming and coastal aquaculture. So it's really broad impacts across, our ecosystems, across our economies, and across our health. And I'm sure Pat will speak more to this in terms of the impacts that, for instance, microplastics can have on human health, which we're only, I think, beginning to understand how it works across the food chain with bioaccumulation. But, the problem is definitely big. It seems daunting, but we shouldn't really let that discourage us. And the fact is that we're here to discuss, how we can all work together as individuals, as communities across the world to solve this issue.
Thank you, Gabby. And your points about some of the industries along the coast, how they're impacted in such extraordinary ways. I'm interested to hear more as we move forward in this webinar from you and the other speakers. And I would like to open this up now to a panel discussion. And so if we could take a few minutes to start with maybe talking about how this problem has changed over time. Shifting baseline syndrome captures the notion that aspects of the environment can shift to such a large degree over the course of a generation or two that our baseline for recognizing the problem is already seriously diminished. In other words, if there were, say, 1,000 humpback whales in a region in the mid-1900s, and that had been reduced to 50 whales by the turn of the century, around the year 2000, let's say, then current generations will more likely than not look to that 50 as the gold standard. And as a result, it's really a quite misleading perception of the environment and the ecology around us, particularly along the coast. So my question to the speakers, have you experienced this in any way? And what are some of the current trends you are seeing?
Yeah, David,
Well,
I'd be happy to grab that and maybe provide some perspective from an international experience. I've worked in many continents across the world, and I've seen that syndrome, shifting baseline syndrome firsthand in really alarming ways. So some examples would be small children out on a Sunday afternoon on the coast, running and playing soccer with one another, normally like a really beautiful, wholesome scene, except that it's entirely contaminated with plastics of every nature, from electronics, things that you wouldn't even imagine, like electronics and pieces of vehicle and furniture, along with all of the packaging and textiles from solid waste management systems not operating effectively. And as you said, all of our rivers lead to the ocean, and most communities, if they're not along the coastline, they are along a riverway. And this is normal. So this is how a large percentage of the global population is being raised up today, that this is all they've ever seen. This is all they've ever known. And so that doesn't trigger that instinctual pain that I think many of us environmentalists feel when you see even like a small piece of one piece of litter in a pristine environment. You're like, no, I have to clean it. But if you've only ever seen contamination everywhere in every environment that you're in, it doesn't cause that reaction to, I need to act and I need to do something. And so I think that speaks to us that we can't let the baseline shift at all, right? We have to maintain that the environment should be pristine. It should be free from human-made materials. And that's the baseline that we should protect for our future generations.
I also believe, and I agree with everything Heather had just stated, I believe that, through the generations, we weren't aware of the problems, obviously, so there wasn't a record there, we didn't have the records that we have currently because we didn't know there was a problem. I mean, heck, plastics are pretty new to our world. I mean, relatively speaking, but understand as far as the baseline goes, one of the problems is that who took the baseline, who created the baseline? We don't, who knows? We don't have consistent data from different organizations across the world. We record things differently than other organizations do. So what we've done is we created our own baseline. And we're going, just like was mentioned before, we have our own baseline and we're going from there. And that's one of the things that we do. And as far as I mentioned before about education with our microplastics program is that we're trying to educate people about the amount of plastics in the water. So that, and what we do is we do water sampling with our volunteers. We train them how to do the sampling, and then the volunteer comes in and actually goes to a microscope and identifies how many pieces of plastic are in there. And then we share the information with the Flora Microplastics program. So it is documented, and we also document it ourselves. So at least we have a starting point for us. So we are able to see, what's going on across the country. But what we can do is actually communicate. And one of the things that we actually need to do is work with other organizations. So we're working with the EPA. I'm working with the universities. We're working with DEP. We're sharing everything we have and everything we bring in. And I work with over 20,000 volunteers a year on over 1,500 projects. We have a pretty big affiliate, so there's an awful lot of information to share. So, in order to prevent that from happening in the future, it may not be as scientific as NOAA would do or the EPA would do, but it is information to share. And when that person collects that water sample and then goes under and looks at it under a microscope in our office and actually finds the piece of plastic, it's like, wow, that's really in the water. It's really in our water. So it's a reality here. So we're getting more people to become involved in it. The generations are more, the younger generation is more apt to be a part of helping to prevent this from occurring, and a little bit more open-minded to the different solutions that we can work on.
Thank you both. That's fascinating to think about, those shifting norms and baselines. Pat, you mentioned with the data collection, and it's really, as you pointed out, without, comprehensive data from around the world dating back centuries, which of course we don't have on litter directly, it's hard to truly measure the scale of the problem and how it's gotten worse or better. But let's be honest, got worse over time. But at the same time, the citizen science aspect, like you mentioned, is huge, and we're seeing more and more of an emphasis on that from federal agencies, from organizations like all of yours, on collecting data, because frankly, it's people who I think are reawakened to these problems and how much they need to do something about it, and that's that's an extremely valuable tool that the more we use it, the more valuable it gets, because the data increases and we have more ways to measure it. But just building on that, speaking of the trends themselves, just in your own work, and this is for any of the three speakers, in your own work, have you seen any trends worth noting in recent years, over the last few years, over the last decade or two, whatever makes sense to you?
Yeah, happy to jump in again. Trends in litter, and sorry if I keep focusing narrowly on plastics. I appreciate our conversation is wider than that. It's just my little niche, which has gotten really big. But I think one trend that for me is probably the most alarming is that at this point in time, every single location on planet Earth that we've ever tested for plastics has come positive. So any depth of the ocean, any remote beach, up in pristine lakes in the Alps. And I think the one that's most alarming is that there is a group who's measuring the increased density of plastic in the ocean via the melt and thaw of the Arctic ice caps. And so every year we can see how much more is coming back than the year before. So that just really, in my mind, puts something very kind of overwhelming, but at the same time visual at the trend. But on the other side, because I don't want to be doom and gloom, about some positive trends to address the solution is that since about 2015, I think there has been a rapid kind of global awakening, I think you could call it, of the problem. It's all of a sudden, I've been working on this issue since 2010. And at that point in time, there weren't a lot of people talking about plastic pollution and it being a problem and a throwaway society. It was few small groups, mostly based in California, who are a bit aware. And it was about 2015 that people's eyes just opened up and we're like, whoa, this is getting out of hand really quickly. We have to do something. And it's not, out of hand in one community or another part of the world. It's really everywhere. We can start to feel how pervasive our reliance on the single-use plastics economy is. And there's been this really rapid growing trend of solutions, innovations, groups working together to figure out how to really shift the entire economy. This language of a circular economy, popped up around 2015, 2016, and at least in the spaces I work, it's kind of common nomenclature at this point in time. And I would say that the number one thing that we can look at to say, okay, this is really important and people are really catching on and something is going to change is that currently the whole world is negotiating an internationally legally binding instrument on plastic pollution, or AKA the Global Treaty. And they'll actually start meeting for the second session of negotiations in just today, tomorrow. So I think that is something for us to be really encouraged about, is that the whole global community is working together saying we need to find a solution to this particular type of pollutant. And we've had positive examples in the past. The one that I think most environmentalists know about is the Montreal Protocol, addressing CFCs, which were depleting the ozone. And it was a pretty quick, swift interaction that global states in partnership with industry agree that, this particular type of chemical is polluting our environment. We need to remove it. And it was effectively removed. And we saw remediation of the natural environment in a very short time span. So I think that's the golden, lighthouse that we can work towards. But I think, good trends ahead of us.
Yeah, I would echo what Heather just shared. You shared it perfectly, Heather, kind of on the problematic of the problem of the situation, but also on the exciting pieces ahead of like this growing momentum and awareness and need for collaboration and all being part of the solution. And also, I think a growing awareness in the ocean community as well of how all these different pieces, from fisheries to shipping to climate adaptation and mitigation, combine with the plastics issue and the litter issue in our oceans. Like seeing those pieces come together and all of us working towards a solution has been a great trend that I also agree has kind of emerged in the past decade or so.
The average person still just doesn't know.
Right. The average and my staff that's sitting here enjoying the webinar just said that there's so many people that just don't know. They don't know, they don't understand. So again, this brings it right back to education and teach them. And I just wanted to take a little step back there and give Keep America Beautiful a little credit here. I've been involved with Keep America Beautiful since I'm 12. So and I'm a pretty old lady. No, not that old, but it's a passion and love of mine. And because I just truly love the water, so any trash that goes in that I'm emotionally upset about. But, Keep America Beautiful came out, it was formed in 1953. And why did it form? Well, it created because there was a problem of litter. And what we decided to do, I should say, so because I'm part of Keep America Beautiful, is pull people together and work together to find a solution. And from that point is how the whole programs have evolved. And I think we're in the right direction. And the more people we pull together to our table will help us with a solution to this. If anything, it's educating everybody. So.
Well said by all three of you. And what I really like hearing in that is, Heather, with your remarks about, on one hand, you have this pervasiveness that is just everywhere on the globe, but countered by the potential for also all around the globe action being taken through that global treaty. So, and again, it comes back to that problem as Gabby and Pat mentioned. It's local issues, but it also is very much a global issue. And so the action can take place in those different realms, but all of it needs to go to that same solution. And one of those, or that same group of solutions, I should say. And along those lines, that human interdependence on the marine life that Jenny initially mentioned and Gabby also spoke to. I'd love to talk a little bit more about that, particularly as it affects some of the coastal industries. I know along the East Coast, I got to work on a project about an issue that I hadn't even been aware of prior to working on it, and that's abandoned crab traps in many of the bays, Barnegat Bay, Chesapeake Bay, a number of the large bays along the East Coast, and I know it's in certain Pacific areas as well. You have these crab traps that are abandoned or cut loose. A propeller might cut them as a boat's going by, but basically these crab traps drop to the bottom of the bay, and then while they're forgotten about by all of us on the surface, they actually become death traps for marine creatures. And that could be young fish in their nursery grounds. It could be other crabs, and it could even be protected species like diamondback terrapins and others. This becomes thus an environmental ecological issue, but also a safety issue. It's a hazard to boat navigation and an economic issue affecting the crabbing and fishing industries. So Gabby, I would love to hear from you about your work with some of these industries. How you would classify some of the marine debris impacts, and kind of how are some of the coastal communities responding to that?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, David. Yeah, definitely. It's a big issue, like you said, discarded. I think Pat mentioned that 80%, right, of the litter that ends up in marine environments comes from land, but there's other 20% that often comes from, discarded fishing gear that's either kind of an accidental discard or intentionally left there. So I definitely think that the fishing industry and fishing communities across the United States and across the globe need to be part of the solution. And I think all of us as individuals and as communities can also be part of the solution and kind of be aware that everything we do has an impact and has consequences. And I've seen kind of the power, which is the beauty, right? The power of communities taking action to solve some of these issues. So at RARE, for instance, I would support fishing communities in changing unsustainable fishing practices that were damaging to marine environments and negatively, in a way, impacting their livelihoods. So fishers were going out to sea and catching as much fish as they could. And over the years, they noticed there were declining catches, right? They were noticing those trends, and instead, right, they weren't really connecting to the why. They were going out there and using more destructive fishing practices, for instance, because they wanted to feed their families and they wanted to provide their children education and a better future. So a lot of what the program that I ran did was providing that education, providing those tools and those resources to empower them to change their practices, right? So they can start to see the connection of how those marine resources out there connect to their own livelihoods and to their futures and to their well-being. And, I'm a firm believer that local actions and conservation initiatives can really make a difference, especially if they're replicated, right? Because if it's only me as an individual, then perhaps there's not much impact there. But if it's me plus my neighborhood, my neighbor, my neighborhood, my community, my county, and you keep scaling that, then there's an impact there. And going back to kind of the problem of, discarded fishing gear. In this case, Fish River was working to promote sustainable fishing practices, but there's a very powerful approach that can be replicated when you empower people with the education, with the tools, with resources to change behaviors. And that can be, right, learning how to use sustainable fishing gear, but also kind of changing behaviors around litter, around how to properly discard fishing gear. And it's something that Keep America Beautiful, as Pat was sharing, has done very well across many communities in the United States.
Thank you, Gabby. And then very well put. And I would, I love the fact that we have each of these responses by all of the speakers is echoing that theme, that local to regional to national to global. But you bring up a good point too about the replicability of different solutions, and that's one of the things, of course, I want to bring up now is well, what are the solutions? And of course, it would be nice to say there's one solution and we do it and everything's fixed. But my guess is that you'll each say some version of myriad solutions. All of them have to contribute. But what I'd like to hear in particular as well is if you do see examples of things that could be replicated elsewhere. Maybe it's something you're doing, maybe it's something a partner group or just a group you're aware of is doing in one locality that could be replicated and expanded elsewhere.
I could answer that one as even specifically with our affiliate with the microplastics program. I mean, and I'm going to be honest with you, it's not just the microplastics program that we share, but Florida's got a really great network of affiliates, and we share everything. So, if I create something, it's not necessarily Keep Pinellas Beautiful. Yes, I use it for Keep Pinellas Beautiful, but any one of the other affiliates are more than welcome to take what we created, make it their own, make it better. So, and one of the things that we have done is we've created a hospitality partnership program that we've shared. So talking about different people we're really great at educating the residents, but we have millions of tourists that come into our county. So we need to make sure that the hospitality industry knows how to just educate the guests so that they can help as well. But then going into the microplastics program, we've shared it as well with all the affiliates in Florida. And then as well as it's open to any Keep America Beautiful affiliate that would like it. And if any teacher would even like it, we will share it. It's a little bit extensive. And what we've done is we took the Keep America curriculum and combined it a number of different activities from other organizations that can help create, this actual program. So it's not just to the water sampling, it's understanding the whys behind it, again, with education.
Yeah, just to echo on that, and I think that Gabby will come in too, and we can all share here because don't we love solutions? And I think what I was expecting, Pat, because I think we'll all share this as well, is that what's the best solution that we can all do is don't litter, right? So we all can take complete full responsibility of all the waste that we generate, no matter the inconvenience, and ensure that it's properly managed. And that's particularly important when you're out and enjoying the environment, when you're in a national park, or even just, a random piece of, pristine environment that you might happen to find, a beautiful little creek or pond or patch of wood, and you're like, oh, it's just a banana peel, or it's just, one cigarette butt, or, it's not just one, because there's 7 billion plus people on the planet, and we all can make a big mess if we do. So that's the number one solution. But I think other things that we're seeing that can really catch fire fast is, the education piece, but making it fun. How do we turn information into activity, particularly for kids, and apply, STEAM principles, science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, and get kids really young to, even college kids, to get involved and use their minds to be creative, to identify the solutions. And We've got great examples of recent Earthshot prizes, young by really young kids, because their minds are open. They can think out of the box. And so I think those are great programs that are scalable. And then another one that we're really trying to learn in our organization is how to communicate in 2023 and get ourselves prepared to communicate in 2025 in a world that's run, we're not even run by like Facebook and Twitter anymore, which, some of us older people have started to gear up for, but now it's like TikTok and it's like 10-second videos. So, I'm still in a kind of science academic world where we're used to producing these really long publications with all these citations, and no one's got time to read them anymore. So you've got this information that's stagnant. It's in a PDF. It's, getting old as soon as you put it out there. And it's hard for people to engage with. And so, finding ways to make our communication fit in the world that we live in now, and making, relying on data and software and technology and open platforms so that whatever, like Pat was saying, whatever work that we do, people can build on, they can make it better, they can adapt it and make it their own. And that's kind of the interconnected, collaborative, internet-based world that we now live in. So I think those are good ideas to start with.
Yeah, and just to add quickly my 2 cents, I would echo what Pat and Heather have shared already. And I think for me, kind of that replicable solution is really the approach. I think if you root that approach in behavioral strategies that are kind of proven to drive towards more sustainable behavior, again, insert the behavior in this case, it's right, don't litter, or move towards a zero waste or reduce waste economy, you can really make powerful change in that way. I always like to say that, any crisis that we're facing, including the marine debris crisis, is a solvable one, but we really need approaches that are local in scale, but global in scope. And we really do need to involve, every sector and bring everyone to the conversation. So Heather, I love what you're doing with your organization, because we really do all need to be working together to solve this challenge. It can't be solved by an individual or a community or a consumer alone. We need government, we need businesses. We really do need to all be part of the conversation and the solution.
And I think this is really important to mention at this point, talking about the solutions for this is one, definitely don't litter, but then we also need to consider the amount of waste we create in the first place. The average person creates 4 pounds of trash per day. In the Tampa Bay area, it's 8 pounds per day. So if we can teach people how to decrease the amount of waste that they create in the first place, that's another step. Yes, recycling is an answer. It's part of the answer. We definitely want to have more products that we can recycle, but we also need to realize that we have to take responsibility for what we create ourselves. If you look at the comparison between Japan and the United States, what's the percentage of that?
It's like just a pound or two.
A pound or two a day compared to our 4 pounds a day. What do they know that we don't know? How can we do that? So.
Excellent. Thank you all. These are some great insights into some potential solutions. And we wanted to open it up to questions now from attendees. We see a number of questions in the chat. I could throw a few of these out there and love to hear what each of the speakers thinks for some of the questions. One of them has to do with and Jenny, did you want to?
Yeah, David, I thought I might jump in
perfect.
and just to frame. I've been reading through the questions, and I just couldn't wait another second to jump in and thank the panelists for just a super interesting conversation. There are a couple of themes that are coming up through the questions that I think are really relevant. One, people are interested in educational materials. I think so much of this conversation and so much of what I've learned here in my first year at Keep America Beautiful is just the vital role that education plays and how we need to get back to it all together. So I asked the speakers if they know offhand to put some links into the chat for folks. And we will also follow up with education materials in the thank you for attending emails in the coming days and weeks. But talk about any education materials that your organization might have, just so folks have a little bit of an idea of what's possibly out there. Heather, what do you all have for kids?
We really focus on adults. I need to say it shortly. So we offer a lot of webinars like this, as well as thematic deep dives, really pulling into the economics of the situation. When we think about plastics, it's pervasive in every single aspect of our economy. So there's really deep, and like touching on a question here, why can't governments do more? We use plastics in everything that we use, from eyeglasses to dental wear to all of our clothing, our automobiles, all of the electronics we're using. So it's a really difficult challenge. It's not as easy as kind of pulling a plug. But yeah, so anyone can check out our website, and I'll pop our link there, and you'll find a different offering of pre-recorded webinars, as well as upcoming topics to learn things about like the Global Plastics Treaty, about bioplastics, about different types of recyclings, about deposit return schemes. So we'll link that below.
Yeah, Heather, that's terrific. So it sounds like those are resources for high school juniors and seniors and on up. So people who are really looking at the multiple civic aspects of this work as well as the environmental. So I think thank you for that. Pat, I know you all have some more youth-focused programs and initiatives. You want to talk a little bit about what people can expect that you might be able to share? You're on mute.
Hey, I'm ready to answer it. We have, I just shared Keeping House Beautiful Story of Plastics link, so that you could get the information that's on there. Feel free to make it your own. That's the only way that we're going to be able to share this, everyone do it, is if they can find something in there that they can work with. But there's other types of things that we do. We do a youth education conference every year with high school students. We have a youth advisory council. We have high school chapters. We've got, all different ways so that we're reaching all different types of people. And we have all of that information to share, the how-tos or what's done. And we're more than willing to share that with everyone. The other programs, again, is the hospitality program that we have, and the how-tos with that as well. But everything that we do, again, is something that everybody else can do. Because if we can do it on the small budget that we have, it could be done.
Yeah.
So,
thank you. And that's great. The what can people do question, right? And we've touched on it a little bit today, right? It came up again in the Q&A. And I started making a list and would love for folks to add to it. So I'll start and then invite you all to add to it. So a couple of things that I've heard today in what can people do about this problem. So there's the international level solutions and the Global Plastics Treaty, which is so very exciting for that high level engagement. There's also national, government efforts through government funding sources and government action that can happen at the national level. So much of this work really is driven by what happens at the state and local level across the US, right? So then it comes down to what can people do to influence that? There's a couple of things at Keep America Beautiful that we would suggest, which is one, look for cleanup, right? We've got 700 organizations around the country doing cleanups in their community all the time. Especially as we respond to the realities of a changing climate with increased storm and stormwater runoff. No matter where you are, the litter on the ground in your community is ending up in waterways, and we can do things about that. If you don't have a cleanup in your area, make one on your own. We'll provide a link to how to order a cleanup kit from Keep America Beautiful that can help you take advantage of your own skills and times and friends and get out there and organize your own cleanups and communicate. Advocate for your local government, with your local government, for funding, for litter removal, for legislation that influences plastic bags being in grocery stores and other convenience stores in your community. Purchase products manufacturers who are being intentional about reducing packaging, reducing plastics in their packaging. I know some of the beverage companies now have cardboard carriers for aluminum cans. All of that is recyclable, right? Those are all things that keep plastics out of our waterways. Look for those and choose those. And of course, what Pat was saying about reduce and reuse, what you're buying all together and how you're engaging. So that's my short list. Maybe Gabby, I'll start with you. Other things that you're hearing and what can people do today?
Yeah, well, Jenny, your list was short but very comprehensive. I think you took a lot of the things that I had on my list. But I think what I would add is that for me, it really comes down to being aware and intentional in the choices that you are making as an individual and as a consumer, because we're out there and, we are making choices for ourselves. And like you said, if you opt for the more sustainable, the more green options, then that makes a huge, huge difference. And I think the other piece that I would add is don't just leave it with yourself. There is, a huge influence that we exert on each other, on our families and our friends and our communities. So my other piece of advice or thing that we could do to make a change would be to really get others in your networks and in your circles to join you in some of these swaps and the changes that you're making. Because again, an individual won't make a difference, but together we will. Those individual actions added up have huge impacts. So that would be my other two pieces.
That's great. Thank you. Heather, the Global Treaty is exciting and something we should all know more about. If you could share, how can people learn more about the treaty and what can the, average person or average high school kid or soccer mom like me, where do we go to be supportive of that? How do we get involved?
Yeah, sure. You can definitely let the U.S. State Department know that you have interests and that you have priorities. I'll link below the list to the official UN Environment Program website for the treaty negotiation process. And there are for the upcoming negotiations starting next week, they did have a period where they allowed official submissions into that process. And so every country in the world made it an official submission, as well as I think 147 stakeholder groups. And so that's all available on the website. You can figure out what the U.S. State Department, as well as the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and many other groups and companies working in the U.S., but also globally are advocating for as part of this process. And then you can wait for another week or so, and OPLN will be releasing the webinar that we held yesterday that gave a deep dive on those submissions. So we took the labor of love for the global community and we read them all and we pulled some stats out. And I think what was most interesting is that the number one thing that particularly member states were talking about was human health. Which is not what I expected to be the number one topic. Reuse was really high on the global agenda, as well as banning and limiting certain types of single-use plastics and other problematic, unnecessary, and hazardous plastics. So that's kind of what would I say, cheat sheet into the webinar, but we'll be happy to share those links. And then if I can share one creative idea, which I think a lot of people might find fun, particularly those of you in school or on campuses, is host a waste competition. How can you pull out waste and reclaim it and make something cool and interesting and use that as a talking piece to get people engaged, to understand the size of the waste problem, to understand the role that we all play to minimize our own waste, to make sure that we're choosing recyclable, compostable materials, and then managing those materials accordingly at the end of life.
It's a great idea. I can just even imagine what people could create. It would be a great activity for college campuses and high school groups as well. Thanks for sharing. Pat, over to you. Anything you'd add to my list for as many of us get ready to head off to the beautiful beaches on this Memorial weekend?
One of the things that I would add is that something very easy that we can do is we could be role models for other people. A lot of times, people will join into things that they wouldn't normally do because they see you doing it. An example being is bring your own straw to a restaurant rather than using a disposable straw. Or when you're on vacation and you got that extra Publix bag, grocery bag, because you forgot to bring your reusable bag, but you use that to walk on the beach in the morning to get that all around tan, pick up trash. You know how many people start doing that because they see other people doing it? I mean, it's contagious. It's contagious. So the right thing to do is contagious if it's presented in the right way. And then we also have to understand that everything that we do affects our planet. So if we're more conscious of what we're doing and what like the waste we're creating, that's the way that can help decrease the amount of waste that's on our planet.
Great, thank you so much.
Mhm.
There is one question that's come up a couple of times throughout today that really has to do with the upstream narrative, right? So everything ends up in the ocean, but it starts in many cases way upstream. So any thoughts on where we are in sort of upstream management of plastics as it relates to ocean? Heather, I may, as someone who may have a sort of 30,000 foot view, anything you can do to inform folks, and I will say, well noted, and I think folks could look for more content from us on sort of the upstream narrative in the future. So Heather, over to you for some thoughts.
Yeah, and one word I would say, it's a groundswell, huge momentum. I think that everyone realizes that it's a priority. I was really, really proud as an American to read the U.S. State Department's submission to the INC that upstream was their priority, and particularly enabling reuse infrastructure in the United States. I spent all morning, so it's timely, looking at the U.S. Plastic Pact's website, where they're hosting a reuse catalyst. And they've got on there, I think, nearly 20 really exciting, innovating companies in the US that are unlocking the reuse economy, which is really like we're changing the entire way that we consume, or really, I would say more accurately, taking it back to a way that we consumed 50 years ago. But it's got to break the current paradigm. So there's a lot of work to be done, but there's a lot of exciting innovations that are happening. And so you can be on the lookout for them. And I said it already, U.S. Plastic Pact Reuse Catalyst is a great resource. There's also the Upstream Institute, which has a ton of information on their website, so you can learn more about upstream solutions, who's doing what, why it's important, how to lobby. And then you also have the Closed Loop group, which is doing a lot of great work. So just a couple of resources that attendees might want to check out.
Great, Heather, thanks. And those are all absolutely terrific, and it really tees up, along with the recycling conversation, the reuse conversation, right? As really, and the reduce and reuse conversation is really just key elements for how we're ever going to get our handles on the volume of plastics in the waterways and litter more broadly as well. David, I think we're coming to the end. On behalf of all of us at Keep America Beautiful, we are grateful for your attendance, for your interest in this topic. This is the first of 3 webinars, so look for the next one coming as we continue to explore issues of litter in our environment and how that affects us and the things that we care about in this world. Thank you all so much for joining us. Look for a follow-up email from us with many of the resources that you've seen today and a chance to review this recording, as well as get connected to the ocean plastics recording and webinar that's coming in the future. So thank you all for joining us, and have a terrific afternoon.